friends, Cherie Larkin here, continuing in the overview of the story of how I got started in my prosperity in my life. When I started my journey, my ultimate goal was simply to have enough money to feel secure in case something happened or if I happened upon unexpected circumstances. Oh, I wanted to have some money to buy nice things, but at a young age, watching when my dad got sick and my parents struggled financially, there grew up in me a strong desire for security. And that translated itself into a desire to have enough money to feel secure. And at that point in my life, I was still living in duality in the world out there and the world of spirit in here, and I had lessons to learn that true prosperity is much more than money, and that true security really is in God alone, because that is an instant, constant, abundant provision and supply. And I learned that when I was clutching too tightly to worldly success, thinking that I was the one doing it and achieving it and not recognizing God as the source of everything, that Spirit would present me with any number of opportunities to grow my faith, to pull me back to live from spiritual truth, that God is the source of everything, and that's an eternal security, and that nothing in the world out there can be as secure as connection to the Spirit of God within you. Now, some of the opportunities God presented to me were not so pleasant, if you know what I mean. I had a steep learning curve, and in this video, I'm going to share with you what happened when I hit some major financial downturns. You'll see how important it is to not only keep your consciousness strong, but it's very important to establish a consciousness of wealth and well-being in you in the first place, because it will work to draw prosperity into your life even when you're not on your A game. Developing a wealth consciousness is like learning to ride a bike, that once you're up and pedaling, you have the skill forever. You essentially become a bike rider. Isn't that the truth? There's a part of you that is bike rider. And once you learn the spiritual principles of prosperity, you have the skill forever. And prosperity becomes a part of you, a part of who you are, and it becomes your way of life. You become a prosperous person. So with that in mind, as we're continuing to get to know each other, let me share with you some of my best prosperity downturns and some of my most marvelous prosperity upturns. Once, after a divorce, I left a very upscale life, and I moved across country to start over. And I rented the second bedroom in a woman's apartment, sight unseen, made the arrangements on the telephone. And I got there, and it was a 10-foot by 10-foot bedroom with a tiny little single closet and a tiny single bed with a bathroom across the hall. And I had shipped 2 boxes of possessions to my new bedroom and carried 2 suitcases and my golf clubs on the plane. And that was the sum total of my new life. And I remember sitting on that tiny little single bed, staring at that tiny closet in that tiny room in my newly single life, with my little tiny compact rental car parked out front in that little single parking space that was assigned to me, asking, okay, God, what now? I felt heartbroken over the end of my marriage, really sad and really frustrated to be starting over yet again. Have you ever been there, starting over but not wanting to have to start over? Before moving to the new city, I had interviewed for 4 jobs, but I didn't get any of them. But as I shared in my first video about the story of my early life, it was like going to college with just enough money for the first semester. I wasn't at all sure how I was going to pay my way in this experience, but I moved even though I didn't have a job. And sometimes, Spirit has implanted a desire in us and a way for us to go. It's implanted in our heart, and that's the first move. Then the ball is in our court, you see. Sometimes we think we're going to sit and wait for a sign from God or some kind of guidance from God. But God's already made the first move by placing the inspiration in your heart, the desire in your heart. And so it's your turn now to follow it, to find the ways to move toward the fulfillment of that desire. And the day I was scheduled to fly to my new life, one of the employers I had interviewed with called and said that the person that they had hired ultimately didn't work out, and they asked if I was still interested in the position. And I accepted the offer, but it was a 70% pay cut below what I had been earning. But still, I thought, well, this is better than having to have some income than to draw down on my savings every month. But still things felt pretty dismal. And I was really having to work inside myself to power through my feelings of loss and sadness and hurt. And I knew none of those feelings could produce income or increase or happiness in my life. And so I just asked God to support me. Sometimes I just free fall on God. I asked God to support me and to help me during that time as I was regrouping my faith and getting my strength back. And my consciousness of prosperity was working for me, even though I wasn't doing a very good job of working it. Because not too long after I arrived in my new city, I was led to buy a little condo that was near a lake. And it was the reason I bought it. It was very old and needed a lot of work. But the reason I bought it is it was vacant and I could move into it right away. So I could send for my things and have the movers come and move everything, and I wouldn't have to go to storage. And so I bought this little condo that needed a lot of cosmetic improvements. And at my job, I was working in the international teen program, which was really only a national program. It wasn't very international at all. But one day, two men stopped in my office, and they had a heart to make the program truly international. And they invited me to help expand it globally. And they asked me if I'd be willing to fly all over the world to the cities of my choice, all expenses paid, so that I could grow the outreach of the program. So I was never really in that office at that job, and my 70% pay cut looked really different flying 30,000 feet in the air as I was flying to London and Madrid and Berlin and Moscow and Mexico and Costa Rica and more. And a few years later, when I got off the plane and I started ministerial school, my first week in school, I received one of the ministries in my hometown sent a tithe check to support me in ministerial school and had a little note that said, we'll try to send something along every month. And they did. Every month for 2 years, they sent a tithe check that paid all of my ministerial school tuition. And while I was in ministerial school and not working any longer, my uncle, whom I've only met 3 times in my life, passed away. Well, a few years earlier, his wife had died, and I knew they'd been married more than 50 years, and I thought he was probably experiencing grief and loneliness, and so I sent him a little card. And then I wrote 1 or 2 letters in big letters so he could read them, because I didn't know that his sight and his hearing was any good. And I called him a few times and offered words of encouragement and prayed with him. And I had to be shouting my prayers into the phone because he was so hard of hearing. But it meant so much to him that, unknown to me, he went down to his attorney's office and added me into his will. And when he died, while I was in ministerial school with no income, he left me a 6-figure inheritance, which more than supported my time in school, more than restored my 70% pay cut that I had agreed to. And when I graduated from ministerial school and sold that little condo that I was led to buy because it was vacant and I could have a place to move my things, the real estate market, the values had escalated beyond my wildest dreams, and my profits were really quite spectacular. Now, I don't say all of that to say, well, look at me, how lucky am I? I'm working the principles. I've created a consciousness of prosperity that works for me even when I was down and out, feeling sad and frustrated and hurt. So let's answer a question that I'm asked quite often. How can I stop feeling worried and afraid about my future? You can see from my story that I was being guided and prospered even in the midst of changes and difficulties and heartbreak. There is a spiritual law of divine restoration. It's in the book of Joel, chapter 2, verse 25-27. It says, I will restore to you the years the swarming locust has eaten. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and then you shall know that I am the Lord your God, and there is no other. I am the Lord your God, and there is no other. And as we move through this prosperity journey, I want to help you build your belief that you are always being guided, that there is the Lord your God and there is no other, that you are supported by God, sustained by God, healed by God, prospered by God. And you may not be able to see the guidance in the midst of the experience, but you cannot allow yourself for a moment to think that anything about your life is outside the realm of the all-providing goodness of God. When I moved into that little tiny room and I sat on that tiny bed staring at that tiny closet, my knees were shaking and I felt sick inside. And I didn't know it then, but in the midst of the experience, I didn't know it in the midst of the experience, but I can look back now and see that God was present and active in my life in powerful and profound ways, that I was being guided every step of the way, that I asked for help and provision and supply, and God was a present help, provision, and supply. The job opened, the home opened, the tuition for my ministerial schooling opened. All of it came into being when I wasn't on my A game at all. You are being guided right now, wherever you are, whatever the circumstances you find yourself in, whatever your need, God is with you and there is no other. God is with you, God is within you, and God goes before you to make your way successful, prosperous, amazing, and blessed. And so your homework this week is to make a mental note of a time in your life when you were in the midst of change, a time when you were not on your A game at all, but things still worked out, not only well, but remarkably well, miraculously well. You have the same kinds of experiences that I've had, and they build your faith, and they build that faith muscle in you. As you look back on that experience, you can say it was luck or coincidence, but if you look closely, I'll bet you see that you were being guided, that you were being divinely restored, and that any sense of defeat or overwhelm you may have felt created just enough surrender, just enough opening for God to get in and perfect that which concerns you. I am the Lord your God, and there is no other. How much easier could your life be if you began to fully rely on God? When I learned to rely on God for everything, my life took on a charmed feel. It's exciting to get up every day with a sense of assurance that all the security I've longed for all those years ago was already in me and remains with me and will be with me throughout all eternity. And the same is true for you. I am the Lord your God. There is no other. And I hope that you'll come to live that truth more fully as we journey together in these prosperity teachings, on this prosperity path. There are lots of exciting spiritual principles, tips, insights, and teachings coming along for you, and I'm so glad that you're here. You deserve an amazing life, and I hope to provide the tools that in some small part, some small way, to help you realize the abundance of your life, that you can create permanent and lasting prosperity using the spiritual principles. Until next time, I'm Cherie Larkin, seeing you abundantly blessed.